A Pan Am 707 takes off from New York, bound for Europe, carrying a load of industrial products. In the cockpit, 3 men with thousands of flight hours. The sky is clear. Everything seems normal. But as the plane gains altitude, something invisible begins to change. An imperceptible error made days earlier slowly starts to manifest as a silent and deadly enemy. In the cockpit, the pilots notice a faint smell, then a haze, and finally, hell. What happens in the following minutes will mark a turning point in the history of transporting hazardous materials by air. November 3rd, 1973, John F. Kennedy International Airport, New York, United States. It's 8 a.m. in New York, and here Pan Am Flight 160 is ready to begin its long journey to Europe. Pan American World Airways Flight 160 was an international cargo service departing from JFK Airport in New York, bound for Frankfurt, Germany, with a scheduled stopover at Prestwick Airport, Scotland. The aircraft was to fly over the northeastern United States, cross Canada, reach Scotland, and, after a brief technical stop, continue on to Germany. A routine route by the standards of cargo aviation at the time. The aircraft was a Boeing 707-321C, a converted version for cargo operations. This model featured a reinforced floor and a side cargo door, allowing it to transport freight exclusively or to be used as a mixed aircraft, also known as a combi. The aircraft, registered as N458PA and named Clipper-Titian, had been manufactured in 1967 and had 6 years of service at the time of the flight. It was equipped with smoke detection systems in the cockpit and a Class E cargo compartment, designed to contain fires without the need for direct human intervention. Pan American World Airways, or simply Pan Am, was in the 1970s the flagship airline of the United States, known for its global presence and for pioneering international commercial aviation. In addition to its passenger fleet, it had a highly active cargo division, operating aircraft like the 707 on transatlantic routes. During this period, the airline transported all kinds of goods, including chemical products for the tech industry, such as those used in semiconductor manufacturing. There were no passengers on board, as this was an exclusively cargo flight. However, the contents of the hold were extremely delicate. The aircraft was carrying about 53,000 pounds of cargo, including 15,400 pounds of hazardous chemicals destined for a semiconductor plant in Scotland. Among them were nitric acid, sulfuric acid, methanol, xylene, acetone, and other industrial solvents. Some of these products, such as nitric acid, were improperly packaged and cushioned with sawdust, an extremely dangerous practice that violated existing regulations. The crew of Flight 160 consisted of 3 men. At the controls was Captain John Zammit, 53 years old, with over 16,400 flight hours, including 5,800 in the Boeing 707. Beside him was First Officer Gene Ritter, 34 years old, with 3,843 hours, all in the 707. Also in the cockpit was Flight Engineer Davis Melvin, 37 years old, with over 7,200 hours, 3,260 of them in the same model. An experienced, well-trained team with deep knowledge of their aircraft. At 8:25 a.m., the Pan Am 707 began its takeoff roll. They lifted off without issue and set course for Europe. The climb proceeded normally. The plane leveled off at flight level 310 shortly before 9 a.m. Outside, clear skies. Inside, something began to change. In the main cargo compartment, several bottles of nitric acid began to leak. They had been improperly placed, some even on their sides, and were cushioned with sawdust, a material that should never be used with oxidizing acids. The pressure differences caused the liquid to slowly seep from the glass containers. Upon contact with the sawdust, a violent chemical reaction occurred. Heat was released, white vapor, and soon, flames. All of this while the crew remained unaware that they were flying with a bomb in the belly of the aircraft. After a few minutes, Davis Melvin, the engineer, noticed a strange smell. He looked down and saw a light haze floating. Smoke was entering through a vent connected to the lower 41 compartment, which housed part of the aircraft's electronic systems. The engineer alerted the crew. "We've got smoke buildup in lower 41. We're turning back." They contacted operations. The initial plan was to return to JFK, but the situation escalated quickly. The smoke thickened. At 9:11, Melvin said, "This is getting too heavy. We better go to Boston." The captain agreed. Despite the smoke, the pilots do not declare an emergency, partly because they believe the issue is electrical and controllable, and partly because they were never informed that they were carrying highly reactive materials. The hazardous cargo notification, though signed by dispatch, never made it to the captain. As the 707 turns southward, smoke fills the crew rest area behind the cockpit. Melvin turns, looks, and says, "It's full back there." Then all three don their oxygen masks. Melvin begins executing the smoke evacuation procedure. Depressurize the cabin to 10,000 feet, increase ventilation, shut down certain systems. But the smoke doesn't subside. On the contrary, it seems to multiply. The captain orders a descent to burn fuel faster, aiming to reduce the aircraft's weight, which remains above the maximum landing limit. As they descend toward 2,000 feet, Boston Control gives them priority. Clipper 160 heads toward runway 33 left. In the cockpit, visibility is critical. The captain wears smoke goggles, but they don't seal properly. Smoke stings his eyes. Ritter, the co-pilot, can barely see the instruments. Melvin is baffled. The systems are working. No breakers have tripped, yet the smoke won't stop. Something doesn't add up. Then he makes a decision. Let's shut down everything non-essential. They shut off the weather radar, the radio altimeter, and unknowingly, they cut the essential electrical bus, which powered the yaw damper system, a critical stabilizer when flying at low speed with flaps and spoilers extended. At 9:34, ATC asks if the flight has the airport in sight. There's no response. The transponder has failed. The internal intercom system, too. They're isolated from each other in a cockpit filled with smoke. Side windows are open to try to ventilate, but that only worsens the smoke inside. The aircraft enters the final phase of approach. Speed is high, so they extend flaps and spoilers. But the yaw damper is off. A Dutch roll begins, a type of unstable oscillation, especially affecting swept-wing aircraft like the Boeing 707, combining yaw and roll axes. Witnesses on the ground see it clearly. The plane starts to rock from side to side, more violently with each swing. It lurches uncontrollably. Melvin, blinded by smoke, doesn't re-engage the yaw damper. No one in the cockpit seems to realize what's happening. Seconds before touchdown, the 707 banks, stalls, and plunges nose down at nearly 90 degrees. It crashes near the threshold of runway 33 left. The explosion is immediate. Fuel tanks erupt, fire engulfs the wreckage, and the chemical cargo disperses across the airport and Boston Harbor. The scene is apocalyptic. All 3 crew members die instantly. What had happened? What went wrong with the dangerous cargo at the start of the flight? The investigation, led by the NTSB, faced a complex case involving not only technical and human errors, but also serious systemic failures in the hazardous materials transportation chain. The initial focus was on the source of the smoke. The NTSB could not conclusively identify the exact origin of the fire, but found strong evidence of a chemical reaction between nitric acid and sawdust, which would have generated heat, white smoke, and flames. This type of packaging directly violated existing regulations, which required the use of non-combustible materials such as diatomaceous earth or asbestos. Furthermore, the bottles were made of glass with plastic screw caps and lacked intermediate protection. They were neither placed inside metal cans nor properly sealed. The NTSB deemed it probable that pressure during ascent caused leaks in the improperly positioned bottles, particularly those laid on their sides to fit the 707's cylindrical fuselage. The acid had been purchased by National Semiconductor Corporation, NSC, through Allied Chemical Corporation, ACC, which subcontracted the packaging to Santini Brothers, a logistics company unfamiliar with federal air transport regulations. Instead of consulting DOT or FAA rules, they relied on IATA guidelines, which held no legal authority in the U.S. Worse still, when Santini questioned the cushioning material, they consulted a third party, Lion Packing, who mistakenly claimed that using sawdust was acceptable. That single phone call sealed the fate of the flight. During final cargo loading at JFK, some of the boxes were turned sideways to fit on the pallets. Several of these boxes, lacking the mandatory "this end up" label, contained nitric acid, which increased the risk of leaks. Regulations required the captain to be formally informed of the hazardous cargo. Although the corresponding form was signed, it was never delivered to Captain Zammit, and his signature does not appear on any of the recovered documentation. This was a crucial point. Had the crew known they were carrying nitric acid, they likely would have suspected the cargo compartment from the start, instead of the lower 41 compartment, where they believed the smoke was coming from. Convinced the smoke was electrical, the crew followed the electrical smoke procedure, which led engineer Melvin to disable the yaw damper, depriving the aircraft of lateral stabilization in the final approach phase, with flaps and spoilers deployed. The yaw damper was essential on the Boeing 707, a plane prone to unstable Dutch roll characteristics at low speeds. Without this automatic assistance, oscillations quickly escalated into uncontrollable movements. The NTSB also concluded that opening the side windows to ventilate smoke was counterproductive, as it increased smoke ingress, worsening cockpit visibility. The CVR cockpit voice recorder cut off before impact, likely due to an electrical failure when the essential bus was shut down. Investigators found the final position of the essential power switch set to external, a configuration that disables all critical in-flight systems. Experimental tests with nitric acid and sawdust showed that white smoke appeared within 7 minutes of contact, and open flames developed in less than 20. Pan Am was charged with criminal negligence, an unprecedented event in the United States. The airline pleaded not guilty but accepted a conviction without trial. Several other companies involved in the preparation and transport of the chemical cargo also faced charges. Persistent and uncontrollable cockpit smoke led to an emergency situation that culminated in loss of control due to the deactivation of the yaw damper and an improper combination of spoiler and flap configuration. The source of the smoke, though not conclusively determined, is attributed with high probability to a spontaneous reaction between improperly packaged nitric acid and sawdust. Contributing factors included regulatory noncompliance, jurisdictional confusion, and inadequate government oversight. The crash of Flight 160 had a profound impact on the industry, not due to the number of casualties, 3 crew members died, but because of the severe structural deficiencies it exposed. For the first time, a U.S. commercial airline, Pan Am, was criminally charged with negligence following an air accident. The company accepted the charges without admitting guilt, using a legal strategy known as nolo contendere. It was a historic moment that sparked intense debate in the industry over who should bear responsibility in accidents caused by complex logistical chains. Other companies involved, such as Allied Chemical Corporation and Santini Brothers, were also investigated and faced legal and financial consequences. Confusion in the application of regulations, some federal, others private like IATA's, revealed a legal void that urgently needed addressing. Following the crash, a comprehensive overhaul of hazardous materials transport regulations in the U.S. took place. The FAA and the Department of Transportation tightened requirements in the following areas: mandatory and clear labeling of hazardous materials, training for logistics companies in air-specific regulations, mandatory cargo document review and signature by the captain, restrictions on oxidizing substances aboard conventional flights. Additionally, cockpit smoke evacuation procedures were redesigned, protection for critical systems like the yaw damper was enhanced, and smoke detection systems, previously unreliable, as in the 707, were upgraded. In human terms, it was a quiet tragedy. The 3 crew members died in the line of duty, trapped by decisions beyond their control. There were no large-scale official tributes, but behind the scenes, this case triggered fundamental changes in aviation safety, especially in cargo operations. Though the accident received limited public attention, being a cargo flight with no passengers, its legacy profoundly shaped future regulatory design. One of the most lasting effects was the shift in how fire, smoke, and cockpit interactions are handled in cargo aircraft. The case showed that a misperception of smoke origin, combined with misinformation about the cargo, can be lethal, even for a highly experienced crew. Decades later, when UPS Flight 6 crashed in Dubai in 2010, many of the lessons that should have been solidified after Pan Am 160 resurfaced: cargo fire, dense smoke, disoriented crew, and loss of control. The accident also became a case study in CRM, crew resource management training, as it highlighted how a lack of communication among crew members during an emergency can escalate a problem until it becomes irreversible. The accidental chemical reaction between nitric acid and sawdust also became a standard reference in hazardous materials transport safety courses, as did the concept of uncontrollable Dutch roll due to yaw damper failure, now well documented and considered in aircraft certification processes. Flight 160 didn't change the world overnight, but it laid the groundwork for many reforms that would come years later, when the industry finally chose to look back and learn from the smoke that once filled a cockpit and turned it into a tomb. Thank you for joining me on November 3rd, 1973, a day when 3 air professionals, a Boeing 707, and a poorly packaged cargo came together in a deadly cocktail. Pan Am Flight 160 reminds us that danger isn't always in the sky. It can lie on the ground, in the warehouse, in a phone call, in a misplaced label, or in a cushioning material as common as sawdust. It was a flight without passengers, but not without victims, because what happened that day changed laws, regulations, and mindsets. And while the accident faded from public memory, modern aviation continues to fly more safely, thanks to the lessons learned from the invisible smoke of Clipper 160. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel for more full reconstructions like this one. And to all the members, thank you for supporting content done with rigor. Before I sign off, I'd like to give a warm welcome to the newest members of the channel, Khalidani and Salman Al Khalifa.